It's winter in England now, and my Facebook feed is full of pictures of people putting their little sports cars into hibernation for the next few months. And that got me asking a question. If you're not going to drive them for 4 months of the year, what's the point in having them? And more to the point, let's just imagine that you're a person that can't afford to have a separate little convertible sports car for the summer. What kind of car should you buy? Well, the answer for the last 25 years, of course, has been a hot hatchback. They've slowly been killing off the entry-level sports car market for about 2 decades now. The hot hatch marketplace is an incredibly brutal one. We have Mercedes A-classes with nearly 400 horsepower. The Focus RS is 350 horsepower. Even the Honda Civic Type R is now 320 horsepower and looks like it's come from space. And against that competition, the humble Golf seems a little underwhelming. In fact, even this top-of-the-range Golf R has 300 horsepower. Once upon a time, that was a very impressive power figure. You only need to go back 25 years and you'll find that was the kind of power that was put in a Ferrari. However, in 2017, 300 horsepower doesn't really set the world on fire anymore. Certainly not if you like to play top trumps. But for whatever reason, the Golf is still the defining standard when it comes to a complete hot hatch experience. And so I have borrowed this particular car from my brother-in-law to find out whether it can truly be one car that does everything. In fact, the Golf R is one of these cars that winds up being compared with a whole different range of cars. As a Lotus owner, it's a constant thorn in my side because for the £31,500 that you can buy one of these for, you will get a basic entry-level Elise with a 1.6 litre 134 horsepower engine. And in terms of standard equipment, Lotus will happily supply you the car with both seats at no extra cost. If you want carpets, stereo, air conditioning, anything else, that's extra, and you can very, very quickly spend £45,000 to £50,000 on an Elise. For less than £40,000, you could have a completely fully loaded Golf R, brand spanking new to your specification. That comes complete with a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine producing 300 horsepower, a Haldex 4-wheel drive system, a leather interior, a nice sound system, parking sensors, aircon, and all the goodies you would reasonably want from a modern car. There are, of course, a lot of people who simply will look at that and go, why on earth would you ever buy something like an Elise when you could have one of these? Now, if you don't want to go that extreme, for the price of a new Mazda MX-5, you could have a very lightly used one of these. And with the way the car marketplace is at the moment, you could even be comparing these with something like a nice example of a Honda S2000. Yes, it's an unusual comparison, I know, but let's face it, as petrol heads, we are unusual people. Now, I could bore you guys with tech specs all day long. You know, and I know, this is a pretty quick car. On paper, this is basically as fast as my E46 M3, and that car was no slouch. But today, I'm judging this car as a sports car replacement. And a sports car is about a lot more than just raw speed. Automatic gearboxes, 4-wheel drive systems, turbocharged engines have all changed our definitions of what makes a fast car. And to be honest, on the public roads, the difference between a hot hatchback and a supercar, your outright speed is not actually much different. What is night and day different though, and is to me, a sports car enthusiast, very important, is how a car feels. And that's what I'm going to be judging this car on today. So, let's get it out on the roads. So first impressions are of the interior, and those are somewhat mixed. My girlfriend used to have a VW Sirocco, the Mark III car, which is based on the Mark V Golf. And that had an interior that feels almost exactly the same as this. Now, I really like that interior, but this is a Mark VII Golf. It's supposed to be 2 generations further on, and it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels basically the same as the Golf from 10 years ago, and that's kind of surprising. Like I say, it's not a bad interior, but I just thought the VW would have moved the game on a little bit. I've never been much of a golf person, but my brother-in-law has. He really liked his 20th anniversary Golf Mark IV that he had, but unfortunately he had to sell that a few years ago. So when it came to buying another car for himself, this was the one that he wanted. And there's definitely an appeal to it. He loves driving the car and he loves the sporty characteristic of the car. But by the same token, my mother likes driving this car. And let's be perfectly honest there. If you can have a car that a 30-year-old young man enjoys driving and a 50-something-year-old woman enjoys driving, there's a reason it's got a very broad appeal. Now, the configuration of this car, 2-litre heavily turbocharged 4-cylinder engine with 4-wheel drive, is much the same as the Mercedes CLA 45, a car that I absolutely despised. So you'd think that formula wouldn't work for me in this case. Now, of course, this car is putting out around 60 horsepower less, so it's obviously not quite as highly stressed. And you can feel that. To me, the engine feels a little keener to respond than the Mercedes unit, but perhaps the biggest difference is because this is fitted with a manual gearbox, I know exactly what the engine is doing. Yes, there is turbo lag, yes, there's a little bit of it, but it's not also compounded by an automatic gearbox, which is always trying to make its own mind up as to what it's doing. The seats are nice and comfy and sportive, and they are specific to the R. In this particular car, they are in cloth, but they are also available in leather. The steering wheel is nice and thin and pleasing to hold. Unfortunately, you get basically nothing through it. I would say it's like playing a video game, except I've got a really nice force feedback wheel at home, and you can get a lot of feedback through a game wheel. This one, I don't know how they've managed it, but it is totally and utterly devoid of basically any feedback whatsoever. All the sensations I get in this car are coming through my bum rather than through my hands. One thing I will say for it though, it is quick, really quick. I mean, they claim 300 horsepower, but if you told me that was a conservative figure, I would believe you. Now, on the rev counter, it says the red line's about 7.5, but in truth, it gives up at about 6.5. One thing that really surprised me is how noisy it is in the cabin. Now, I don't mean tire roar, I mean engine noise. This car is not modified at all. Standard exhaust, standard intake. But when you put your foot down, you can hear the engine very, very clearly. However, I do have the impression that it's possibly an artificial noise. It seems a little too loud to be natural, but I'm not too fussed about it. It's actually nice to be able to hear the engine doing something. I really didn't expect to be able to hear anything at all. As a daily driver, one of the things that would appeal to a lot of people about this car is the four-wheel drive system. VW call it 4Motion, but it is a Haldex all-wheel drive system. And the idea of that is that basically it's two-wheel drive most of the time for better economy and such like, but when you need the extra traction, it can drive the rear wheels. Now, I don't know exact figures, but in these systems, they can often deliver up to around half of their power to the rear. But I was driving a very fast sweeping left-hander earlier. I was only doing about 50 miles an hour at the time, and I put my foot down, the car broke traction, spun, and it veered off to the right quite dramatically. And then eventually the rear wheel started to kick in and the car gripped, but I was very surprised that at reasonably low speeds it could lose traction quite so easily, and that wasn't a particularly bad stretch of road either. It's 5 degrees today, and this car is still wearing summer tyres. And it's these kind of conditions where the four-wheel drive system should prove most beneficial, but unfortunately it just doesn't seem to be working as well as I'd like it to. It feels very much reactive rather than proactive. When grip is lost, you can then feel it shuffling the power around rather than just providing you with the traction you need from the start. And it's probably not helped by the fact that the engine is reasonably torquey from reasonably low down, so instances when you can break traction are going to happen sooner than they would in, say, like a naturally aspirated car. The gearbox is very pleasant to use, the action is nice and light and short, and the clutch is very pleasant too. The brakes are a little over-assisted for my liking, but to be honest, that is basically the case with pretty much any non-sports car. You have a selection of different driving modes. Today I've been driving the car in race, which sets everything to its sportiest. That being said, it's still not an uncomfortable ride at all. I'm actually very pleasantly surprised with how nice it is. And the driving position is pretty good too. There's a lot of cars I get in now where you feel like you're perched on top of the car rather than in it. But this feels nice. The dash is reasonably high. You can still see some of the bonnet, which is very nice, and visibility is pretty good, as you'd expect. At the end of the day, it is a Golf. So, is it a sporty car? Yes, it's a very sporty car. Is it a sports car? Not even close. Unfortunately, what really lets this car down is the steering. I don't know how they've managed to achieve it, but this steering is completely lifeless. Even in its sportiest mode, there's nothing there. It gives a pleasant weight when you're at higher speeds, but other than that, there's nothing. I get no feedback from it whatsoever. I'm very, very disappointed. It's especially confusing to me that this car is held in such high regard by so many magazines. This steering to me is inexcusably bad. Now look, I know I'm spoiled with driving a Lotus whenever I like, but even driving things like that Honda S2000 last week, now that car gets a lot of stick for its handling. I don't really know why. It's really, really nice. That is an infinitely nicer car to drive than this. This is probably quicker than that car. I'm not going to beat about the bush. If you just want to go fast for your money, this is a very, very nice way to do it. And I would definitely have one of these over an A45. To me, it feels actually like the more premium car. It rides better. I prefer the engine in this. I really like this gearbox. I like the fact you've got a choice of gearbox. And the Mercedes to me just misses the mark and is a lot more expensive than this as well. I also prefer this over the Focus RS. Yeah, it's just a nicer place to be again. Is it slower? Yeah, probably, but this is still more than quick enough. This is a lot quicker in feel than the numbers would suggest. As a little B-road blaster, this car's great, and in fact you could easily cruise Europe in this car. It does what a hatchback should do, which is be very, very versatile. So in some ways it's a real win for the Golf for me. In terms of its competition, certainly those cars that I've actually driven, it's probably the best of its kind. But as a sports car or a sports car replacement, I think it falls way, way short, and I'm very disappointed with quite how far it falls short. The car I'd really like to try next is something like the Renault Sport Megane, because those are often regarded, it seems, as the best handling of all of the hot hatchbacks, but I don't know anyone with one of those. If you've got one and you'd like me to have a go of it, let me know. In the meantime, please like, hit subscribe if you dare, and I'd like to say an extra special thank you to my brother-in-law Andrew for lending me his lovely car. I'll see you guys soon.